College students. Who was that roommate from hell and for what reason? Had a roommate who got diagnosed with terminal illness partway through the year. It was a roller coaster of emotions as his treatment progressed throughout the school year. I supported him as much as I could and couldn't believe he chose to stay enrolled and on campus through it all. At the end of the school year, he broke the news to me. His illness was terminal, and he didn't have much time left. We said goodbye as we left for the summer, me thinking it was the last time I'd probably ever see him. The next year, he was around campus again. Turns out he made it all up. Never had terminal illness. Story 2. Roommate as a freshman was very clearly super-duper sheltered his whole life and had no clue how to function independently. I and the guys on my floor noticed after about a week that he started to smell. A couple of us approached him as gently as possible to ask if he had deodorant. He quickly said yes, then whipped out the still unopened free sample of soap that was in the welcome packs the RA had prepared. So that showed that not only did he not know what deodorant was, he also didn't know what soap was. We kind of took him under our collective wings and started to teach him general life skills like that. He was making lots of progress. Then one night I woke up and he was sitting next to my bed staring at me. I asked what he was doing, and he said every night he'd just like to sit and watch me sleep. That was the end of that. I requested a new roommate pretty damn fast. Story 3. She wasn't the worst, but she had some pretty gross habits. There was one time she was waxing with those strips, and after she ripped one off, it fell face down on the floor in the room. The rest of the semester had dried wax glue and pube hair on the floor. She refused to clean it. Story 4. She drank watermelon sourpuss liquor 24/7, dripping it everywhere, making all surfaces sticky and sickly sweet smelling. She would be up until 1-2 a.m. blaring Eminem on her stereo. Never would turn the lights off on her side, so I had to get used to sleeping in a bright room and would make about 6 KD macaroni cups a day in my microwave. Any time of day or night. She had sex with a different guy every week. No notice. I was always home. She'd just say, "Oh, sorry, I thought you were fast asleep." One night, I was woken up around 3 a.m. by someone shaking my leg. The boy of the night was standing over me with a banana covering his naked junk, and he's trapped in a pair of handcuffs. "Hey, do you know where she keeps the keys?" "I need to go." I did not. He stumbled back to her side, woke her up. They had sex again, and he finally left. Sans handcuffs. Edit. Some additional details I'm remembering since this seems to be blowing up. She blared Eminem because she saw herself as a white gangster chick from a rough city in another province. Really, not that bad of a place in reality, and would talk about her best friend who died in her arms. I could never find any trace of this dude existing. No obit, no socials, no news headline about a stabbing, nada. I highly doubt he existed. She wore a nice wig due to alopecia, but was extremely sensitive about it. I literally don't think I would have even noticed, but she would constantly get in my face, "Did you tell that I wear a wig?" Or tell me, "Distract this dude for a second so I can add extra glue." So she could have sex with him and not worry about it coming off. A random dealer that hung around our campus didn't go there. Jumped off a second-story balcony of our dorm and bounced off a car because she rejected him. He was fine, but it was quite a sight. Once I woke up to her microwaving a KD cup at like 2 a.m. and heard the dude of the night say, "Put that down and come back to bed." She responded with, "I'm eating this. You can duck me if you want, but I'm just gonna lay there like a dead fish and eat." And she did just that. Thank every god ever that she dropped out after Christmas. Story 5. Not roommate, but more of a floor mate. Had this one gal that was really friendly with everyone on the floor, boys and girls. She was always in someone's room hanging out and would eventually go to someone else's room to hang out. Did this routinely every day after classes. Turned out she was the resident closet junkie and would go to everyone's room being really friendly to steal all their stuff. Watches, jewelry, wallets, laptop. Anything worth money. Everyone found out after a midterm party when she was out in the parking completely blasted on whatever she was taking. She got arrested and expelled. And when it came time to clear out her room, that's when everyone's stolen crap started popping up. Story 6. Everyone else wins. My first one wouldn't wash dishes, let it pile up. She would cheat on her fiancé and would make noises when she ate. Anyways, I had enough, so I told her fiancé. He gave me 2 months' rent and paid for breaking lease. Pretty good profit. Story 7. Not a roommate, but a floor mates. This person was absolutely brilliant. Like doing grad research at one of the largest research universities in the world during their freshman year. Brilliant. The thing is, they had no concept of hygiene. Would not shower for months on end. It was nauseating. Story 8. My now husband had a roommate he would always complain about, and to my chagrin, I thought surely it can't be that bad. We were long distance, so I never met the guy. Over winter break, so while my husband was gone, the guy kidnapped his girlfriend and locked her in their closet for several days. Story 9. Had a dorm mate who didn't shower. Not great, but we didn't share rooms. One day she sat down next to me, didn't ask, and without a word, unfurled a plastic bag of loose pills. Took a handful and then acted like I insulted her. The first week of the semester, she told us it's her birthday, so we went and got a cake for her and put up streamers. She walked in, took them all down, and yelled at us for thinking she wanted to celebrate it. Knocked on my door in the middle of the night and told me her mother died when she was a child, but wanted me to know. She threatened my roommate with her knife collection because she was watching TV in her room, and any noise made her want to kill my roommate and herself. The knives were the final straw. She got moved to another room where she threw a frying pan at her new roommate. I Google her name just to see if she's in jail. Not yet. Story 10. She stole my towel and got crap or blood on it, IDK and I don't want to know, then denied it when the towel was literally in front of us. She ate our food. She lied about the most random and stupid things. Was literally caught in the act of eating one of our snacks and said, "I'm just eating an apple." It was a pretzel. Oh, and she lied about having terminal illness for years and took people's donations for treatment. Commenter, I know a girl like this that I've been serving with for a little over a year now. Early on in our time working together, we walked to get a coffee, and she told me, verbatim, "I'm a pathological liar. I'll lie about anything. I could be eating a burger and someone could ask what I'm eating, and I'll tell them I'm eating fries. I don't know why I do it. I can't stop. I just be lying all the time." I already knew this woman was untrustworthy based on other behavior she demonstrated, but this was all I needed to know from then on. Lo and behold, she never stopped. She's getting kicked out for several reasons now, including, but not limited to, vandalizing government property, a barracks room belonging to one of her boyfriends. She was caught tearing it up after putting his PS5 in the shower, making false official statements to get other people in trouble, and violating a restraining order that was put in place against her and the boyfriend whose room she'd trashed. She violated her restraining order by marrying him. It's a shame because she's actually an incredibly smart person and she can be very, very kind, but it was too much. Story 11. Many nights she would wake me up by watching kiddie shows, like Lazy Town, at full volume and weeping loudly in her bed as she crunched on chips because she was homesick. She lived 30 minutes away and could have commuted instead of dorming. Towards the end of the year, her boyfriend was pledging a frat, and on the last night, they made him run some sort of obstacle course and covered him in things like flour and hot sauce. She told me he would be coming to sleep over because he was finally finished pledging, and I agreed. He showed up as I was falling asleep, sweaty as duck and covered in smelly food. He said he was going to take a shower and disappeared, so I fell asleep. I woke up about an hour later from the sounds and the god-awful stench of them having sex, and he had not showered. They fell asleep and he never showered that night. I didn't speak to her for the rest of the year, only a couple of weeks luckily, or ever again after that. Story 12. I could do a one-man show about this guy. I have so much material, but am pressed for time. Maybe I will come back to add to it. He was out of his mind most of the time. He'd be up at 3 a.m. pressing buttons on the microwave for minutes on end, opening and closing cabinet doors loudly. He passed out in the bathtub with the water running and flooded the on-campus dorm twice. I walked in on him passed out fully nude on the toilet. I closed the door, knocked, and he jumped up and hit his face on the door and bonked his head on the tub and bled across the bathroom. He left a pizza on the common room table for a week. It started to smell, so I covered it with an entire container of Morton's salt, like a pound of salt. Not long after he got drunk and ate it, all of it. His face was so swollen and red that night from all the salt. Eventually, by the second time him passing out in the tub, I told the RD that he was going hurting herself. I meant by accident. I think they took it as he is a danger to himself because half a dozen cops came to our room the next day. He then started threatening them and demanding their names and badge numbers. "My dad is a lawyer, you can't make me go to the hospital. Get out of my way, I have to go to class." "What time is your class?" "It's at 9:30. "Well, it's 3 p.m., so you don't need to worry about it." Once they told him he was going to be arrested, he turned very nice and apologetic. They took him on a voluntary hold eventually. The next day, his mom saw me randomly on campus and recognized me. She hugged me and told me I saved his life because he was mixing alcohol and opiates. His liver was failing. He moved out the next week. That's just a fraction of the crap he did. He was the worst. Story 13. At uni, I lived with 2 girls from out of town. They were heavily into their Class A, but weren't interested in cleaning, tidying, or being decent roommates to anyone else in our house. One of them had a seriously powerful Yamaha amplifier mated to a pair of 350W Tallboy active cabinet speakers. Pricey setup. Cue the obnoxiously overloud music blasting through the house most nights of the week, while they would get crazy high and essentially rave out with crafty trance music all night. One day when I had the morning off uni, she went out and had left her door open. I seized the chance, went in, took the metal case off her amp, and removed the glass fuse, reassembled, put everything back as it was, and left. Peace and quiet for the rest of the term. She couldn't figure out what had happened to it, but I played dumb and said she must have blown the amp. Unsurprisingly, both her and the idiot roommate she came with both failed the first term and left. Story 14. Freshman dorm mate. We lived together in a 20x10 space with bunk beds. We were both introverted and hung out outside the room regularly first semester, but second semester I started hanging out with other friends and she didn't like that. Whenever I would be back to the room late, like 10 p.m., she would be pissed at me and talk about how I wasn't her friend anymore. When I said I'd been hanging out with so-and-so, she'd give me silent treatment. At one point, she freaked out so bad she mentioned about hurting herself, and I had to get the RA involved. She also never left the room except for class or food, so I never had a moment to myself. And when I did come back to the room, she was usually pissed at me for something. She also let so many dishes pile up. I saw mold in cups and bowls regularly. She wanted to move into apartment-style dorms sophomore year and tried to convince me to go in on one with her. I said I wanted to live in a different building, and that set her off crying and another round of silent anger. But I was glad to move building and get away from her. Story 15. Stayed with this one guy in my dorm who was super friendly, but never left his room the whole year. We shared a 5-bedroom apartment, and everyone had their own room. Our unit developed a mouse problem, and my roommates noticed a bunch of their dishes went missing. Turns out my roommate had a hoarding problem and was the source of our mouse infestation. When summer came and we had to move out, we saw inside his room for the first time. Piles up to the ceiling of trash, garbage, used mouse traps, and dirty dishes. Story 16. Going back a few years, but the guy used to go on about the Matrix and how the beast was coming and Clinton's this and that, always going on these wild speeches about the government and elites. He decides he's going on a vacation to Miami all by himself. We all thought it was super weird. While he was gone, the rest of us are watching the news and they're talking about a terrorist attack in North Africa. Algeria, I believe. I make the joke. Prawley, our roommate. The news anchor then says one of them was from London. We're freaking out. They show pictures. And one of them is Korean, with the same last name as our roommate. I'm like, holy crap, that's gotta be his brother. I was right. Before our roommate got home, news trucks start showing up. All these people outside our place. Our roommate got home, went right to his room yelling on the phone in Korean with who we figured was his parents. Boom, knock on the door. My other roommate answers. 2 dudes in suits just walked right into our house and straight to our roommate's room. They were in there a while. Super weird they knew where to go. That whole thing was insane, and I ended up moving shortly after. It was always weird to me that my roommate was also on some trip, alone, when his bro did this. The kid got held in a North African prison a while. Wild times. Story 17. Had a roommate with whom I shared a room in grad school. That guy used to trade stocks in India during US nighttime and insisted on keeping all the lights in the room on. I ended up sleeping in the living room so many nights. Eventually found out that the person who sublet his place had left for the adjacent apartment after getting frustrated by that git. No one else in the apartment spoke to him either. I was so glad to leave that place. Story 18. My first roommate wouldn't shower, and she kept saying she was when I was out, but I started tracking her soap, and it never went down and her hair was never wet. So we went to the RA, and the solution was, I got to pick the Febreze scent she used. Story 19. Well, when we moved into the apartment-style dorm in the fall, he'd been there all summer doing summer classes. His food in the fridge and pantry were literally rotting. He wasn't there to help, so my friend and I spent a while just getting the cleaning done ourselves. Now, when I say rotting, I mean with actual maggots and whatnot. Just nasty stuff. It wasn't our job, but we were going to have to live there, so we scrubbed it all with bleach and made damn sure the place was ducking clean. Later that day, he came back and cussed us out for us having thrown away all his food. That was just the first day. It didn't get any better the whole semester, after which he moved off campus. Now, story 20. I shared a dorm apartment with 3 other people. Me, Sarah, Carol, and Daniel, fake names. We all had our own rooms with a bed and a desk and 2 bathrooms shared, plus a kitchenette and living space. It was great. It was me, 2 other girls, and a guy. The guy was a lil odd. You see, me and Sarah shared a bathroom, and Carol and Daniel shared the other. We each provided our personal toiletries and then took turns purchasing toilet paper. Daniel never provided any for his bathroom. Carol asked that he do so because that was the agreement. He waffled and didn't. She ended up taking a roll back and forth between the bathroom and her room because she didn't want to pay for him anymore. So he started to go into her room, only when no one else was there, and snag it to use. So she started to make sure her room was always locked. So he just showered after every bathroom use. Whether we were home or not, he'd go in, and after a few minutes, you'd just hear the shower running for a while. Then he'd come out with wet hair and clean. There were definitely weird vibes from in general, and I ended up moving home over winter break for many reasons, including my roommates being less than great. Story 21. The school overbooked the dorms and rented a building for the extra bodies. It was just a normal 4-floor condo. It was finished, but unfurnished. The university put beds on all available spaces, even in the kitchens of all the units. After we made clear to the dorm managers that given that we were paying for single bedrooms with complete in-suite bathroom, individual phone line, and internet access, and now we were, as in my case, sharing a sitting room with 2 single beds with a death metal fanatic masturbating monkey with time blindness. We would manage the so-called dorm ourselves, thank you very much. No curfews, no locked doors, no rules other than let people study and don't be a banana. It was awesome, but there was a dark side. As the older student on that condo, I ended as the unofficial RA. They were 18, I was 22. I would not qualify him as a roommate from hell. He was the type of guy that if he ever got you in trouble, he would get you out of it. He was the best wingman I've ever seen. He could get any woman he wanted, and he could pass her to you, and she would be happy about it. He would make sure your glass was full and ensure that you would reach your room safe at the end of the night, alone or with company. He was a fantastic human being, a roommate's roommate. Were we on a different time and place, heroic sagas would have been composed about him. Cocktails were named after him. Children wanted to be like him. Grandmas would want him to date their granddaughters. Dogs would follow him in the streets. He was an all-around great person, and all I ever wanted to be. He could drink a bar dry and still walk straight and bluff out of a ticket without having to blow on the breathalyzer. Heroic on an Homeric scale. A mensch. But man, he was a health hazard. He stunk. His clothes stunk. Whiffs of something dark, musky, and rotten escaped from his room every time he opened the door. It was like he was studying to be a necromancer and had brought homework to this room. He would not let anyone get on his room. We started noticing bug infestations. There was a bug highway going from his room to the ones adjacent to his. His neighbors either side of his room and on the floors above and below protested that they could not open their windows due to the stench coming from his room. We had to do an intervention. First, I talked to him in private. Then we talked to him in a group. Then we pleaded with him. Finally, we all joined. We could not let his legacy be tarnished by the stench of the privy that was his room, and whatever was that made the paint curl on the inside of his room door. We acted. We started by cleaning his room. We discovered that he was using a sandwich press as a grill to cook breakfast in his room because he did not want to wake up early to go to the cafeteria. He had his dresser flat on the ground and he would just throw all his clothes all around. You could not see the floor. I counted 4 or 5 layers of t-shirts before I saw the wood laminate. He would wear whatever passed his smell test and throw the rest on or around his dresser, or coffin, or whatever it was. If nothing passed the test, a spray or 2 of cologne, and there it was ready to wear. That included his rugby uniform. I think that uniform could at that point take his position in the field and play. One dude picked one boot from the floor, took a whiff, and fainted on the spot. That was the first victim. A few had to run out because they felt like puking. I can't discount the possibility that some puked in the room itself. I could not tell the difference. I explained the others that if you smile, your brain decides that you can't feel like puking because otherwise you would not be smiling. Now we had 10 people on that room smiling like maniacs while tears were streaming out of their eyes due to the stench. We found 2 hamsters from our successful breeding program. We all thought those had died long ago. They were still alive and roaming and thriving in the room rodent paradise. They survived eating whatever they found and made a nest with his clothing. We took whatever clothes were salvageable and run them twice through the laundromat, on high heat, with bleach, on a double wash program. Someone requested we use diesel and a match, but I vetoed that. We already had enough fire drills as it was, and I did not want to anger the fire marshal. I don't know why he decided to show me his collection of old fire axes when we first met, and I did not want to know. When we were done with the room, we called the janitors to come in and clean it. That was when I discovered they stopped cleaning his room 4 months ago. I had to swear there was nothing there slithering anymore. Remember the hamsters. And we agreed that I would call a priest to bless the room after they were done. There was a back and forth on that point, but we agreed that the room would have to be cleaned first, because otherwise the holy water could not actually touch any surfaces of anything commonly considered part of the room. We made him take a shower. He pleaded, he howled, he prayed. I swear his head did a 360. I've never seen before a 21-year-old guy cry because they did not want to get wet. The only reason he did it was because somehow he was scared of me. Me, a 5'11" linguistics nerd. 155 pounds of skin and hair versus a 6 feet by 6 feet rugby player. I would not scare myself if I found me on a dark alley. I set a showering calendar for him. I taught him how to launder his clothes and use an iron. He is now a successful engineer. I am delighted to think I made a small contribution to his success, and that I closed a portal to a hell dimension on room 4B. Story 22. Had a roommate that was an absolute slob. Clogged the toilet one day, and we, other roommates and I, hounded him to take care of it. He let it sit for a couple months and refused to fix it. Finally, we called our landlord and he pulled out coffee filters. Dude was wiping his ass with coffee filters and flushing them, or at least trying to. Was the worst smelling bathroom ever. Story 23. It wasn't the roommate who left dishes to rot in the sink. It wasn't the roommate who pirated movies and got me fined because my name was on the account. It was the guy who smelled so bad that simply walking past his room, you could see cartoon smell lines wafting out. That smell was baked into the soul of the room. You'd need a goddamn priest to fix that godforsaken space. Story 24. Oh my God, David. David was such an insane freak of nature while being so horrific and annoying but doubly adorable and kind of laughable. Like, he was so naive and stupid that he reminded me of a puppy. Yo, I'll tell 3 things. 1. David was a drummer. Not a rock drummer, or folk drummer, a marching line drummer. David practiced freestyling the drums outside, facing the central acoustic space of our entire apartment complex while playing EDM remixes to Justin Bieber songs. 2. A lot of college dorms are in lower income areas because slumlords know they can prey on financially illiterate college kids. One morning, I, on the second floor balcony, was smoking when I noticed a homeless crackhead rummaging through the bushes downstairs. He looked up and saw me and kept trying to talk to me, convinced me to let him upstairs to smoke with me. Instead, I tied a second blunt to a lighter and dropped it to him, saying I had to leave soon. Weeks later, David texts me and says he wants me to meet someone. I walk into our living room and see him with the homeless dude and 8+ of his friends. They were going to throw a party in our apartment. 3. David was getting kicked out or not paying rent. I imagine kicked out for not paying rent. All I know is other people were coming by to look at the apartment, his room, and he didn't want to leave. I only discovered this information when I caught him taking stuff out of our trash can and covering the living room in it to make us look like slobs. David then tried convincing me to play music really loudly and smoke weed inside so nobody would move in. I did none of those things. The guy who came to see the apartment was Chris. Ended up moving in. He was super sweet and I adored him. I hope he is okay and I wish I never lost contact. Story 25. She had a baby over summer break. Did not tell us she was pregnant. Babies were not allowed in the dorms, so the baby lived off campus with her mom, but she would bring the baby to stay in the dorms if we annoyed her. Asked her to clean the bathrooms, =sign infant in the dorm room crying all night. Asked her to stop eating our groceries, =sign. She brought the baby to the dorm for finals week. Didn't sleep and did terribly on my exams and 2 different job interviews. Story 26. Potluck roommate my freshman year brought up a fact from the news about Oprah being influential and wealthy. My roommate refused to believe me, then genuinely said, "Black people don't have a place in our society." I immediately walked out the door to the Students' Affairs office and requested a change. Moved out 2 days later. Story 27. Off the top of my head, various roomies. PI Polar Alcohol, who started partying at 2 a.m. in our 4BR apartment. He managed to get the cops called on us 6 times for noise, one of which was for his girlfriend screaming, and I answered the door. His girlfriend would bring home pets, dogs, rabbits, which I gave away because they didn't care for them. Oh, and we weren't allowed to have pets. Poop, boy. Back in the days of crafty internet when you had to reset the cable modem daily, it was in his room. We took turns running into his room and holding our breath to reset it so we didn't have to breathe in his sweet aroma. Cops called because his girlfriend broke the sliding patio door since he wouldn't let her in. When people learned where I lived in the complex, they were full of horror knowing I was with the lawn screamers. The best roommate I ever had. We said like a total of 6 words to each other all semester. I always had dreams of moving to NYC, but I'll never have roommates again. Story 28. I had a roommate. One day I had to go into his room to get something. Can't remember what it was at the moment. Had his computer on. 18+ movies on all the search engines. I didn't think too much of it at the moment. Looked away after a moment of seeing it on his screen. A few months later, I graduate and move out of state and ask him to forward any of my mail to the new address. He helps me out on it more or less, but then sends a very strange letter asking me to send a letter of character to a guy I don't know. When I ask him about it, he says it's for some stuff I need. I Google the name and it's an attorney from the city I went to school. At that point, I refuse to do anything further knowing it's something legal related and wouldn't come clean to me about the matter. Turns out a few weeks later, he gets arrested and charged with CP, registered as a KEX offender the rest of his life. Makes me sick to my stomach. He was doing that crap right next to me. Never spoke to him again. Story 29. Picture 2 nerdy guys who would never clean up after themselves. They would make a ton of dirty dishes, leave them in the sink for weeks to let them rot. The whole suite smelled like garbage, and it was embarrassing to have guests over. I got to the point where I started cleaning everything, thus enabling them to continue their behavior. I left them notes. I tried talking to them, but their doors would always be closed, and they never talked to anyone but each other. The day I left, I cleaned up only my stuff, took all the trash and threw it in front of their door, walked out, and said I would never live with roommates again. Story 30. Competitive player would stay up till 4 a.m. yelling into his headset and playing on the world's loudest controller. I asked him multiple times to keep it down, and he'd immediately go back to yelling. Story 31. My roommate didn't shower or do laundry for the entire semester I lived with him. He and everything he owned, and subsequently everything I owned, smelled like raw beef. Story 32. Heads up. Mine involves a roommate. My freshman year, I had a roommate that was always fighting with his girlfriend, who was also a student there, fighting over the phone and in person in the dorm room even while I was there. It happened so often that I avoided going back to the dorm as much as I could. He drank a little gasoline one night after they were fighting, and I had to call 911. He was threatening her to drink a glass of gasoline and splash some in her eyes on accident. After that, he went away for about a week and then came back and things seemed normal for a few weeks. One night when I returned to the dorm, he wasn't there and I didn't think much about it. When I woke up, he wasn't there either. Later that afternoon, I found out he offed himself in his car outside of the dorm building his girlfriend lived in. It was a weird situation to see grieving family members come to our dorm to collect all his things. His girlfriend came and visited me to see if I was okay and explained to me what happened. She ending things with him for good and police had to be called, and he was escorted out of the dorm. He came back a couple hours later to off himself in the parking lot. She said the only reason she didn't break up with him earlier was that he was always threatening to off himself if she did. She said his parents knew about the threats and tried to get him mental help and supported her decision to end things. They even knew she was going to do it that day. Story 33. Senior year. I took 20+ units a semester to graduate a year early and avoid another year of loans. No time for dorm roommate bees. Charming roommates smoked a month's worth of speed in a week and spent the next several days strung out, shrieking, caterwauling, yelling at each other, ditching class and terrorizing the kitten they adopted without my consent, who I then had to take care of because it was terrified and kept crapting everywhere. One night, a couple of them burned a foot-wide hole in the carpet in their room while smoking speed. I reported them to housing so I wouldn't be charged for any damage at the end of the year. When they came down, they started whining about weird clicking noises on their phones, landlines. It was the 90s, and were paranoid they were being tapped. Maybe they were. At least they stuck to pot, beer, and Molly the rest of the time. They were pissed that the cat liked me better than them. Story 34. Was not a college student at the time, but one of my roommates, I will call her Vanessa, was. She invited 2 of her unhoused classmates, Kelly and Elaine, to come stay with us when the pandemic lockdown started, and many of the services they had been relying on were shuttered. These 2 ended up being the roommates from hell. Vanessa ended up moving out a couple months later, leaving me, my fiancée Lisa, Kelly, and Elaine, who were also a couple. We found out that Elaine had done time for child molestation some years ago. Somehow, she had qualified for relief from being required to register as a sex offender. To make things even more interesting, her GF Kelly was in her 30s, but looked and acted like a 14-year-old. I can hear some of you cringing at this point, but I promise it gets even worse. Elaine believed that she was the blacksmith of God and incarnated as a human because God was forcing her to take a vacation. Kelly believed that she various magical powers, including pyrokinesis. My GF Lisa once overheard Kelly telling Elaine about how she had had dream sex with the sun god. Elaine asked Lisa on multiple occasions if she could put her personal Xbox in the living room to be available for her and Kelly to use, and was told no every time, but continued to ask. Elaine and Kelly lied to a charitable organization about not having enough to cover their share of rent and were given rental assistance. They then used their actual rent money to buy themselves a PS5. Lisa informed me on multiple occasions that Elaine and Kelly would talk crap about me when I was away at work. As soon as I got a higher paying job, Lisa and I got the hell out of Dodge, and we have been happily living without roommates ever since. Story 35. I wouldn't say she was from hell, but she was pretty bad. Things started off poorly because the school had too many students accept their offer of admission, and there was a housing shortage. So some study rooms, about 2/3 the size of a regular dorm room, were converted to dorms. Space was tight in these rooms. My roommate and I ended up in one of those rooms. We were just very different people. She was a social butterfly party girl. I was more quiet and introverted. I think she was expecting her roommate to be her bestie partner in crime, and I was a disappointment to her. Within 2 weeks, she just acted like I didn't exist. That's fine. I didn't need her as a friend. The issues started when she had people in our teeny tiny room constantly, which made going about my own life difficult. But I was tolerant, figuring it was her space too. The final straw was when I was woken up at 2 a.m. on a Friday night with the bed shaking and realizing my drunken roommate was having sex in the bed above me. Gross and 100% unacceptable. I had plans to go to housing that Monday, but she said the following day that she was moving out, taking an open slot in a triple in the dorm next door with 2 friends. Well, okay, bye-bye. She moved out the following week. I fully expected housing to assign me a new roommate due to the housing shortage, but for whatever reasons, they never did. I certainly never brought the opening to their attention. So, I ended up with a glorious single for the rest of the academic year, and I only paid for a discounted double. They'd offered a discount due to the smaller room size. It was heavenly, so it all ended up working out in the end, at least for me. Story 36. When my dad was in college, his roommate used to steal his clothes and pretend like they were his. When my dad would confront him, he would get angry and refused to admit he had stolen them. He'd also take my dad's calculus books and walk around with them on campus so other people would think he was smart. Story 37. I graduated 6 years ago, but I'd be remiss not to mention these 3 guys I shared an apartment with in my 3rd year. This was not a university-owned dorm. It was an apartment building across the street from the university. Asterisk, I'd always wake up to unfinished food on the tables, fruit flies flying everywhere, cigarette ashes in said food and in their glasses, asterisk, my plates, glasses, and cutlery being used, asterisk. I took everything back to my room after a while and only brought it out when I was using it. Asterisk, speaking of cigarette ashes, they covered the smoke detectors so that they could smoke. The smell was unbearable that I had to call the landlord to get it removed when I knew they weren't home. Asterisk, I shared a bathroom with one guy, the other two had the other bathroom. He'd leave his stuff everywhere, including hair in the sink bathtub, and there was a lack of a shower curtain. Asterisk also, oftentimes, I'd go into the shower and see it half full with dirty water. It was so bad I went to the campus gym to take a shower. Asterisk, the guy I shared a bathroom with would bring his girlfriend over more often than not. Let's just say I heard everything. Asterisk, they tried to make everyone pitch in to buy cleaning supplies, but when I realized I was the only one supplying any money, I immediately stopped. Asterisk, when I finally moved out of that hellhole at the end of the year, my older sister made the trip to help me. I showed her the common areas, how disgusting they were, and she absolutely let loose on my soon-to-be ex-roommates because of it. She basically did all the screaming that I wanted to do towards them. Story 38. I'm 30F now, but when I was 20, I briefly lived with two roommates. Both were horrible for different reasons. First one was Bar. She was vegetarian and had severe OCD. Neither of those things should have been an issue, but she tried to tell myself and our other roommate we weren't allowed to have meat in our shared fridge. We each had our own shelf, and hers was on top. If I left clothes or anything on the floor to my bedroom and she saw it, she would scold me and tell me she can't handle knowing my room isn't clean. There was once I borrowed a DVD from her. I asked, of course, and she said as long as I put it back. After I watched it and put it back, she came home, went in her room and started screaming. She ran into my room in tears and told me she couldn't believe I didn't put the DVD back in alphabetical order. Also told me if I left for the evening, my cat had to stay locked in my room. She wasn't allergic or anything. Second was Bae. She had very rich parents that bought her tons of clothes and stuff. She overflowed her room and started putting racks of her clothes hung up in the living room. She would go out 2 or 3 times a week and bring random dudes home without notice and allow them to help themselves to stuff in the fridge. Came home once to some random dude sleeping in my bed because of her. And another time she was screwing one on our couch when I came home. So yeah, those were the absolute worst. I am so glad I don't have to deal with roommates anymore. Story 39. She was the Ray for our building. I used a measuring cup without asking. I know I was in the wrong for that. But it was either that or not have lunch, and I didn't have any of her contacts to ask since she wasn't home. I did clean the cup after I used it. She confronted me, asking if I used the cup. I apologized immediately for not asking, and she said we weren't having that since I went through her drawers. This led to her being passive-aggressive for the rest of the summer semester, and she slowly moved the following out of the shared space to prevent me from using paper towels, napkins, dish soap, trash bags, the trash can in the kitchen, the drain catcher in the sink. She also moved my baking pans from a shared drawer. After this, I tried having a conversation with her about what items she wanted to share. That conversation was like pulling teeth, and I got nowhere but was met with more passive aggressiveness. Near the end, I was at the community building picking up mail, and I debated whether to ask her for my package since I didn't want to deal with her attitude. I work up the courage to have a cordial interaction. I run to the grocery store after and come back to her venting, yelling in the phone about me since I took a sec to walk up to her, and I said my full name to pick up the package, which she already knew apparently. I was glad to get out of there. On top of that, she didn't ever clean the floors of our shared space, but the kitchen and living room were filled with her decor. Story 40. It's a little tough to describe, because no one thing this guy did was ever really noteworthy, but the accumulation of craftiness really made him a roommate from hell. Dude straight up yelled at me, not super loud or angry, but definitely yelling, for ordering food without seeing if he wanted to join the order. I asked him every time I ordered after that, and then he got upset that I always asked. He also never joined an order before or after. He also never asked me to join one of his orders or invited me to anything for that matter. I guess he expected me to be psychic and know when he wanted to be included. Super weird. The guy literally never took out the trash. I once said, I'll take it out this time, but can you please take it out next time? And the dude blew up on me. The next people he lived with also never took out the trash, so they just threw trash on their enclosed side porch, which was disgusting. He got upset when I watched a movie or played video games in our apartment's living room with like 3 other people in the middle of the day on a weekend. The crazy thing was, outside of his roommates, he seemed like a pretty decent guy, but anyone who lived with him was never a roommate for more than a year. Story 41. Not currently a college student, but when I was, my college roommate purposefully blew snot on me during an argument, like covered one nostril with her finger and blew out as hard as she could. When I said that I would be contacting our advisor, she said, well, I thought we could handle this like adults, but obviously you feel like you need help. Story 42. Floormate who more or less lived in pure filth on his side of the room. One time I walked in and saw a box of chicken nuggets and walked over and grabbed one. Without turning his head, he said, "Don't eat that." I asked why not. He responded, "They're about a week old." He and his roommate had a symmetrical setup with their desks and beds. So jokingly, his roommate took a photo and then photoshopped in a line down the middle that said, before and after, with a disaster on one side and everything tidy on the other. This led to tensions between them over the first couple months. One night we could hear the tidy roommate saying, "Dude, you are disgusting and sick. You're a sick individual all up in your head." He was about 5'8" inches, and the not tidy guy was about 6'8" inches, 300 pounds. After a few minutes of him verbally going at him, the big guy just yelled, "That's it," and we heard him shove the other guy into their wall. The tidy roommate ran right by our door and was actually giggling as our heads were turned watching down the hall. All of a sudden, all 300 pounds whizzed by us trying to chase him down, but he couldn't round the corner and wiped out. He punched every door walking back to his room, and we could see his knuckles were now leaving blood fist marks. When he was in front of us, my roommate said, "Hey man, let's relax a bit." After the incident, the big guy was removed from the dorms that night but remained at school. Story 43. I had a roommate my first year at uni. I didn't know her, but she seemed nice enough, kept to herself, and was always on her laptop studying. We rented a student apartment, and it was just the two of us. There was a basement area for laundry and a storage room down there. She told me not to go in the storage room as it was her stuff. She lived there before I moved it. After a couple months, I'd noticed things going missing. Some articles of clothes mainly. She would sit on her bed and stare at nothing. She creeped me out. One time, I caught her going through one of my bags in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. She had the balls to sneak in my room. She started to make me really uncomfortable. One night, I was awoken by a flash. She was in my room. I said, "Are you taking pictures?" She said, "No, I was looking for something with my phone light." I put a lock on my door after that. I got the feeling she was watching me at all hours. One day, she took out the trash, and I quickly looked through her phone and found tons of pics of me. She came back in and said, "I know you were on my phone." I denied it, and she said she was watching me. I decided to move out. Before leaving, I decided to snoop and look in her storage closet. There was a life-size doll sitting at a table and nothing else. Story 44. 1. Didn't brush her teeth. Expected me to remind her to do homework. Expected me to be a backup for her alarm clock. And final straw, sorted her underwear based on what was too dirty to wear again, too. Moved her drug-addicted boyfriend into the dorm room when he lost his apartment due to paying for pot instead of rent 3. Refused to take allergy meds, but insisted on sleeping with the windows open, scream-cried on the phone with her boyfriend at least 3x/week, and then to 45-plus-minute-long coping showers, never cleaned up after using the kitchen, and had bio-experiments with middle-of-the-nighttime sensitive actions, but would make me suffer the alarm. 4. Got pregnant on purpose, thinking her boyfriend would propose, kicking the rest of us out so they could live in the house on their own. Instead, he broke up with her. 5. Threatened to kill me for asking if I could restart her laundry in the morning when I woke up, rather than having the washer prevent me from sleeping at 1 a.m., as it was in a space that shared a wall with my bedroom, and shook said wall lesson. I don't pick good roommates, and I got progressively worse at it. Story 45. Moved in with her homeless boyfriend. It wasn't discussed, he just stayed, even when she was in class. He had his jaw wired shut from a fight, and listening to him eat was always a delight. This was a 2-bedroom student apartment, and she had a double room with another girl. There was a lot of drama and strife, but it came to a head when new girl and Jaws decided to have sex while the girl in the shared room was sleeping. She could hear his he hissing through his wires. She screamed. I hid in my private room ready to call the cops. He also took a crap so bad it broke the only bathroom we had. They had to send out a plumber. We took the issues to campus housing, and they were reluctant to move her, even though, funnily enough, she'd been moved in on us unannounced, and partly into the semester, which means we weren't her first housing assignment. New girl wanted to install spy devices in the apartment because she said we were trying to poison her. She went on a whole rant when she thought I wasn't home. I did not feel safe, and finally told housing I'd just call the police, and not the campus ones, if he was in the home without her. It was wildly uncomfortable and a very stressful period. It may have only been 8 weeks, but it felt like forever. Story 46. She convinced our entire residence that I was bullying her and went behind my back and reported me to our warden. I started being treated badly by strangers, and rumors were going around about me. Anyway, I was called for a meeting with the warden, but when Ye heard my side, they were enraged on my behalf and asked why I put up with all the things my roommate would do. Switch off my alarm, leave dirty dishes on my side, uncleanly in general, take things from my food drawers without my consent, etc. In all fairness, it was my first few months of college, and I didn't really know how to stand up for myself properly / self-respect. Roommate and the warden and I eventually had a meeting together, and warden helped the roommate reflect on their actions. A statement I never forgot when they apologized was that they didn't realize they had become the bully that they hated growing up too. In any case, it took a few months, but I eventually forgave them. They apologized multiple times, and all things are good now. I only lived with them that year. In retrospect, I am kind of grateful that I was able to learn what it meant to have self-respect and grace for others. It hurt a lot at the time, especially when I just told myself to stomach everything now. A good couple of years later, I'm a better communicator and have more empathy. Story 47. I stupidly moved in with my best friend's girlfriend. They broke up in January. Our lease was over in April. In those 4 months, she, 1, was late on rent multiple times because she was spending all her money on strippers. 2, got a dog that we weren't even allowed to have, then didn't take care of it at all. It was some crazy hyper terrier mix that she didn't potty train or take outside, so the entire apartment smelled like crap and piss, and the dog kept destroying stuff because it was bored and untrained. I couldn't do much because I was working full-time and going to school full-time, so I was barely home. 3, stole all the money out of my change jar. 4, let a couple of her wildly unstable friends stay with us, so I got to listen to a lot of screaming when I was home. 5, got kicked out of the military for just being a duck-up. And the coup de grace 6, decided to stay in the apartment when the lease expired, fine, but didn't bother to sign literally the one piece of paperwork she needed to show that I wasn't on the lease anymore, then left on bad terms with the apartment complex. So I was on the hook for the $800 she owed them, or it would have gone to collections and ducked up my credit. She made an agreement to pay me back, and of course, never did. Lesson learned. Story 48. My freshman year roommate was a treat. She frequently used my things, one being my laptop because hers broke. I was okay with it for a bit. And one time I was like, hey, I kind of have to do my homework, and she asked if I could go to the library. I said, no, you're going to have to do that. She lied about B-SAD. We begged her to tell authorities or even our Ray because until we knew it was a lie, we felt terrible for her and a little scared ourselves. She always had different dudes in our room. She made a love shack underneath her bed, so you didn't even know if she was in there or not. Random dudes used to knock on our door all hours of the night. One night, I had a literal group of men knock at 1 a.m. and then ask if they could wait for her to return. Hard pass on that one. She'd smoke weed in our room all the time, which whatever. But she'd do it and know my parents were coming that day to visit. She stole things constantly. We went to the mall together once, and she probably stole $500 worth of perfume from Kohl's. She dropped out after the first semester, and I got a room to myself the rest of the year. We're still friends on Facebook, and it looks like she's doing well now, so that's good. Story 49. I had a foreign roommate from South America. Can't remember which country. I've honestly tried to block out all memories of my time with him. He moved into my dorm room in the spring semester of my freshman year, and he was so loud for no reason. He would be up until 2 or 3 in the morning on FaceTime with friends from back home. I don't mind being up kind of late, but that is ridiculous. He would make bowls of ramen, and he would eat so loud that I could hear it in the dorm hallway. I ended up having an anxiety attack because of the constant slurping. He would get bowls of ice cream and leave them sit on his desk for a day and then eat them. He wouldn't clean up after himself, and my room got several demerits because of his messes. I talked to him. Nothing changed. I talked to our RA, still nothing. I went to the deans, and still absolutely nothing changed. I ended up just sleeping in my room. All other waking time was in class, the library, or out studying or hanging out with friends. It wasn't all bad that because I made some really good friends because I was forced out of my dorm. I actually got to know my now wife better because of me spending less time in my dorm. Story 50. She was religious and didn't think animals had souls or any kind of feelings and would try to pick arguments about it with me. I volunteered at a school for mentally challenged teens, and she said unbelievable things about them. Like when we were paired up with students for activities, she asked how it was decided who would pair with who, and I said it just depended on everyone's personalities. And she goes, "They have personalities? Oh." And she claimed I smelled. I bathed, I swear. And she insisted on these Glade stick-ups I was allergic to, but refused to get rid of them. And she ran the heater every day. I would be literally panting in front of a fan. One time I had a bad reaction to hair dye and had to go to the ER. She'd never been to the ER before and asked to go because she was curious. The hospital was trying to figure out how to treat me. I'm on a bed in this South Central lay hospital surrounded by like gunshot victims. And the lady next to me having a miscarriage, and here comes Susan. "When will you be done?" "I have homework," ducking Susan. I got a bill that summer from the uni because she took my bed's mattress cover after I left. Story 51. One of my roommates got a chow without telling anyone. Her dog attacked my cat and I. I ended up at the hospital with stitches in my hand and later got an infection. A couple of months later, she got pregnant and didn't tell anyone. She gave the kid up for adoption. Living alone after that was heaven. Story 52. He was a scrawny little guy that really wanted to hang with the jocks. They accepted him to poke fun at him, mostly when they were all drinking. He stumbled into the room hammered more times than I can remember. The worst was towards the end of the second semester when he came back and projectile vomited across my end of semester art project. Story 53. For context, 4 dudes to a room 16 to 24 years old in these dorms. I had a roommate who would leave crap-covered underwear on the floor, did not shower for over a month, would watch hentai in the middle of the room, with his TV on blast would beat off with all of us in the room less than 10 feet away from them. Story 54. Had a roommate that was an early member of the Proud Boys. Dude absolutely refused to shower. There was 3 of us in a small dorm, and this guy was like 6'3", absolutely covered in hair. It was brutal. Used to spray some sort of doily with his ex-girlfriend's perfume every night and sniff it and cry. Worst semester of my life. Story 55. My very niche, not very hellish, personal hell. Had 3 roomies, all randos, Gina, Nina, and Mandy, whose sister Sandy would visit sometimes. 2 of them had boyfriends named Ryan and Brian. At some point, they were trying to evict each other, and it was very difficult for me to keep track of the drama. We were friends in high school, with her being a year above me. When she suggested we be roommates my freshman year, I figured it was better than rooming with a stranger. Turns out she saw me as her best friend and became very jealous, plus possessive, when I started making new friends on campus. She demanded a best friend day where I spent it all with her and only her, when I got into a relationship to prove that I wasn't abandoning her. On top of that, she was extremely sheltered and babied. She would only wash her hair once a week so that her mom could visit and straighten it for her. No one else could do it right, apparently. Which, okay, yes. Some people just wash their hair once a week, but I'm pretty sure this girl only showered her whole body once a week as well, based on, smells. She claimed she showered every day, just when I wasn't there. That roommate situation lasted a year before I couldn't anymore. Story 56. G. Asterisk. Asterisk was the roommate from hell. It was innocent and not conflicty at all, but looking back, I feel bad for the guy. My roommate lived on the beach in Florida and made the decision to go to college in DC. What a culture shock. This dude, in a hurry, moved at a half speed. He was a lifeguard with a resting heart rate of like 47, and yet he was a metal fan. Not me. I'm from Philly and high-strung. I loved the Dead and classic rock and played guitar. This means I had an acoustic and an electric +2 amps and pedals in our tiny dorm room. I was not great at the time. This guy slept maybe 16 hours a day, 10 at night and a couple of naps. I always had people coming by. I'd play the Dead or my guitar, and this dude would come from class to go to bed, and there would be 2 extra people in there, or I'd be playing guitar or whatever. He lasted the whole year, but he didn't come back. I've never seen or heard anything about him since. I hope he turned out all right. Story 57. When I was 18, I had a dorm roommate named Dougie. Dude kept a plastic bathroom tarp hanging around his bed, was in his mid to late 20s, and was a huge shut-in. One day while he was moving out, his drawer spilled open, and an asterisk bunch asterisk of prawn mags dropped out. A heartbeat of awkward silence passes. Then he looks up at me and shouts, "Why did you put those in there?" Dougie, if you're reading this, I hope you're living your best life and are a happy dude. But you were kind of a ducking weirdo who made 18-year-old me deeply uncomfortable. Story 58. I had a dorm mate who was from Brazil, but had lived in the US for the last 8 years. He was a nice guy, but holy duck, did he smell awful. It wasn't your typical beau smell. It was like his natural smell, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Our neighbors on either side and across from us could smell it as well. We also get notes posted on our door to take a shower and clean your git fairly frequently. Eventually, I'd get used to the smell, but whenever he came back in the room, it would refresh the room with his scent. I tried getting a new dorm room, but my only option was to room with 2 other people, so I didn't want to risk it. I tried to bring it up to him, but he said he didn't smell anything and that the notes were being left were for me, not him. He was in complete denial about it, so our conversations never got anywhere. Story 59. Man is someone who works in residence life. These stories always make me go, yeah, that tracks. Here's just a few of the issues I've seen in my time. 1. Roommate put bleach in water bottle of their roommate who had pandemic to see if they were faking it. They weren't and had to go to the hospital. 2. Roommate and her boyfriend were always in the room being sexual and would look over at the other roommate during to try and get her to join in with them. 3. Girl refused to shower in the dorm showers and instead used tea tree oil over her entire body. She lived 5 mins away and would shower at home once a week or so. 4. This one was actually my roommate. They didn't know how to flush a toilet, and I'd find crap and piss in the toilet constantly. 5. An apartment of girls who were all well off financially except one of them. They all would go out to bars and clubs every weekend. When the one who wasn't well off couldn't go because she couldn't afford it, they just cut her off completely. There are a lot more I've seen. People are generally awful in college. Story 60. It wasn't really bad, but just weird. Sophomore year in college, my dorm mate was this guy who never went to class, except for whatever required discussion sections he had. Got up at noon every day and proceeded to play computer games all day. At 6, he wouldn't even eat in the cafeteria, but would go next door to the student union and get Wendy's every night. Story 61. He was on a lacrosse scholarship and decided he didn't want any classes before noon, so he could go drinking every night. It was an alcohol-free campus. He never came home before midnight and never came home quietly. In the first month, he came home drunk and pissed on his bed urinal style. Twice, I woke up at 2 a.m. to some random person in my room going through our fridge looking for beer that we could get in serious trouble for having. The final straw was when I was woken up by some heavy knocking at 1 in the morning. I mumbled something about just letting himself in, but the knocking continued. Eventually, I stumbled to the door to find security because there was a set of keys in the lock. No sign of my roommate. I told my parents I was either paying for a single room or they were going to be paying bail and moved that week. He spent the rest of the semester spelling drunk on his ceiling with beer bottle caps. It was actually pretty impressive as it was clearly readable from the quad. There was no second semester for him. Story 62. I had a few really bad roommates. One of my freshman roommates would stay out all night, drink with her 25-yo stepbrother. She was maybe 17. Oh. When she did come home, she'd keep the TV on and blaring. She didn't make it through the first semester. Had another roommate who I was forced to share a room in our 7-person townhouse. Only 3 people lived there at the time. She had her dad come give me a talking to with an ankle bracelet on about having strange men, my boyfriend, staying over in our room. We were of age, and my roommate could have chose the other bedroom, but she insisted on mine. The lecture didn't work. She proceeded to have parties at all hours of the night, any night of the week. I worked until midnight and sometimes 4 a.m. and would come home and not be able to sleep. She was assigned our townhouse because all her other roommates had moved out. Away from her, I assume. There was only 5 weeks left of the semester, and I couldn't take it and moved out a week before finals. Story 63. Mine was nearly as bad as some of these, but I'll share. She was from a known rich town in my state and absolutely fit the rich girl "id gaff about anyone else" vibe. She was a night owl and stayed up really late, like 4 a.m., watching TV on her phone. She would watch without headphones too, even after I repeatedly told her not to because I was trying to sleep. She would bring a random boy over while I was sleeping, so I would wake up for class with some random guy sleeping in our room. She got cold at night and would turn up the heat while I was asleep. One night I woke up sweating and she had turned it up to 75 degrees Fahrenheit and was somehow also covered in numerous blankets. My last straw was right before spring break when I was having trouble sleeping and had finally gotten to sleep when she loudly answered a FaceTime call at like 3 a.m. I was literally in tears. I was so tired. Luckily, pandemic hit a couple weeks later and I was able to move out. Story 64. First year of uni, she made life hell for one of our other flatmates. There were 6 of us in total. She was of some kind of mixed background, Swedish, Turkish, etc., and bullied our flatmate, who was of Indonesian heritage, so badly that we had to have intervention from the on-site halls team. She accused our flatmate of being a bad Muslim because she enjoyed going out, as all first-year uni students did. She tripped her up on a train into the city center. She said she wasn't eating halal, etc. Came back from after Christmas holidays to find our poor flatmate inconsolable in her room, not wanting to show her face and wanting to go home and not come back. Meanwhile, this flatmate was horrendous. She smoked in her room, she went out all the time, had boys over, and then one day I came back after lectures to find her and her cousin praying in our hallway despite never once expressing desire to be religious. It was so chaotic that as soon as my exams finished, we all left. Story 65. I dated a girl that had a roommate from China that had horrifically bad teeth and no sense of space or humor. I went over one time and she was screaming at her BC. She had divided the sink in 2 and you could only use your side, but the water from her side got the other side wet. She really needed professional help. Story 66. In our college house, I shared a kitchen area with some of the other guys I lived with. This one guy, who used the area daily, was a total meathead gym bro and had no idea how anything worked when it came to kitchen basics. Some of the things he would do: regularly thaw and refreeze meat, wouldn't use soap or a sponge, use raw eggs in a protein shake blender every day without cleaning it, didn't take the trash out after a whole summer x2, thaw raw meat on our outside fire escape. I have photo evidence because this one really shocked me. I wouldn't be surprised if he's been hospitalized from living like this by now. I'm not someone to be very confrontational about this kind of stuff. We all just knew he was disgusting. The kitchen area was directly connected to my bedroom without a door. So eventually, when it got bad enough and it was actually affecting my life, I made him move his stuff to our house's other kitchen area and switch stuff with another housemate. Story 67. One of my roommates during my freshman year was absolutely horrible. Kind of gross. Read on at your own peril. The guy also had a bunch of hygiene problems. He refused to take a shower and smelled like a chronically homeless person. His showers became noteworthy events, and we eventually started to keep a record of them. He averaged a 5-minute shower once every 11 days. In addition to that, he'd also never flush the toilet after going to the bathroom. This would result in us coming back to the room after classes each day to him at his desk and a toilet full of crap, piss, and cum left to ferment for a few hours. And as if that wasn't enough fun, he hid several knives throughout our room. He kept a couple at his desk, one in his closet, and one in his pillowcase. He would lay awake in bed, glasses on, staring at me from his bunk. Knowing that he had a knife on him made it all the more terrifying. Story 68. Someone in my freshman year dorm was from a country where I surmised deodorant was not commonly used, and they may have also had a medical issue. The entire half of the hall near their room smelled like Bo so strongly you could tell when they were there even from the other side or the building. I once could tell they had been in the main floor common area hours after they had been there, based on witness reports, because their oppressively acrid smell lingered. Their poor roommate had to keep their bedroom window open all the time, even in the dead of winter, and hide air fresheners around the room and spray air freshener constantly just to survive. Hanging out in their room once when they were not there, I got a whiff of their bath towel and it was pure rotting onion. Roz couldn't do anything because it was cultural, and that person is now a married medical doctor with children who is successful by all metrics. But man, they did not easily make friends. Story 69. First roommate let friends with scabies sleep in my bed one weekend. She also had a knack for only showing up when there was a sock on the door. Her prude sensibilities couldn't handle my shenanigans with my now husband, and she left after the first quarter citing health issues that required her to be in the dorm closest to her class buildings. Story 70. I lived in a 4-man apartment my sophomore year of college. I went to a community college my freshman year and then transferred to save money. But the problem was, none of my friends were going to the school, so I had to get placed with random roommates. One was a foreign exchange student from Brazil, one was a shut-in League of Legends player, and I shared a room with another guy. He was one of the loudest people I've ever met. At first, we found out we had a lot of similar interests and got along decently well, but then he weirdly gatekept me out of hanging out with other friends he had. I asked him about it and he got super defensive. It was like he was afraid I'd take them away from him. After that, he was a piece of crap, complained about everything I did, random freakouts, threatened to report me when my girlfriend came over, not even sleeping over, etc. It became apparent why he had random roommates that year. Story 71. Went on exchange to a U.S. college for a year as a junior. Was placed in junior housing, which was individual houses. I was put wherever there was space, which was a 10-occupant house with the disabled access toilet downstairs. I was with 9 guys, 8 of which were comp sci majors. It was an absolute nightmare. No cleaning. The bathrooms were the most disgusting thing you have ever seen. Milk in the fridge from week 1 was still there at the end of the year. My roommate was a bodybuilder and didn't believe in showering more than once a week. Window constantly open because he smelled so bad. Generally, they were all nice people, but they were just lazy and stinky. Also smash and then would happen every night into the early hours of the morning with lots of screaming. Started dating and spent most of my time at my girlfriend's place. Much cleaner. So many crazy stories from that time. They are all doing amazing now. One guy is making $800K/Y at 28. Story 72. My roommate was addicted to SNES ROMs and would play them for 36 hours straight and then sleep for 36 hours straight. It was like this for the entire year until his GF would come to stay over for a few days, and they would just snuggle in his bed the whole time giggling. Also, we had a communal shower for the whole floor, and the rare times he bathed, he wouldn't wear shower sandals because his logic was that every else wore them, so as long as only he didn't wear them, there was no way for him to get athlete's foot. Story 73. My college roommate was mostly normal the first year. Then he started to get real into droogs. He would go on multi-day-long binges of alcohol, coke, and acid, then to knock himself out, take a duck ton of Xanax. We kind of gave him a break and tried to help him because at the start of the year, he said his brother, he was very close to died in an accident, and that's sorta when his droog problem escalated. So one day his mom is visiting and we are talking while he is out of the room. I mention he has been having a hard time since his brother passed. The look of bewilderment and confusion on her face I will never forget. He never had a brother and made it all up. I assume for pity, or to justify his own droog problem. He dropped out of school not long after that, and I never heard from him again. Story 74. He brought girls back every night, forcing me to sleep in the dorm's common area. He even had sex in my bed on more than one occasion. In the mornings, he'd shower with the girl from the night before, forcing me to go straight to class and rush back to the room to shower at noon before going back to class. After I resigned myself to showering at the gym, I put a Jolly Rancher in our bathroom's shower head. It resulted in him and his dates feeling sticky despite having showered together. The girls he'd hooked up with began to mentally associate the unclean stickiness to having sex with him, and eventually no girl at our college would date him, much less hook up with him. Since hookups were his primary motivation to being enrolled in college, he dropped out after Thanksgiving, letting me have the dorm room to myself for the rest of the fall and following spring semester. Story 75. My freshman year roommate was luck of the draw. He wasn't terrible to me, but he never took out the trash. He'd just throw it in the closet if I asked him to take it out, and refused. Once he tossed a sausage pizza in the closet, and the whole room stank like meat. I introduced him to our friends, and he joined the group. Well, sophomore year, he sad one of the girls, and she kept quiet about it. Junior year, he thought she told someone, so he gave her a black eye. Then it came out that he was overcharging rent to the other friends, 4 shared a house, and keeping the difference. So he wasn't terrible to me as a roommate, but I definitely count that as a roommate from hell. Story 76. Here we go. Flatmate that during pandemic lockdown has a complete mental breakdown. He stopped talking with me just because he thought that I had a relation with the other flatmate. She's lesbian, and I'm a guy. Just because we were getting along well together. He was cursing me whenever I was leaving something to clean, but he was doing nothing in the house except smoking pot the whole day. Flatmate that was leaving dirt in the whole kitchen. He was washing his plates once per week, storing the dirty ones in his shelf. So usually plates were missing. Eventually, once he left rotten fishes on the balcony, hoping that someone of us was going to clean them. Flatmate with anger issues. He was cool and funny until something unplanned was happening and he was starting raging against everyone, screaming around the house. So glad that finally I can afford my own flat. Story 77. My freshman year roommate, she would only brush her teeth, wash her face, shower once a week, would eat Cheetos dipped in unrefrigerated mayonnaise in our lofted bunk beds and leave crumbs everywhere. Lied to my BF at the time that I had cheated on my previous partners because she was jealous that he was interested in me, not her. Lied and told Dara that I was anorexic. I was not. And later told me she did it because she didn't like that I was thinner than her. Told my mom every time I spent my own money on something. Once left a bowl of half-eaten instant mashed potatoes on the microwave for 3 weeks. When I went to throw it away, she cussed me out. Needless to say, after we were done living together, I made a point of never seeing her or speaking to her again. It was a rough year. Story 78. Not a roommate, but a flatmate. She expected everyone to tidy up her mess and brought home a different man every weekend. Escorty and slatternly are a bad mix in a flatmate. Edit. But my now wife had it worse. She had a flatmate who had a psychotic break, pulled a knife, and was planning on killing all the demons, aka flatmates. The police hauled him off before he cut anyone, for which we are very grateful. Story 79. I had someone who was like a sim. No time management or cleanliness. Have to catch a bus for a weekend trip away in 15 minutes? Surely the food you are planning on eating is a quick minute in the microwave, right? Nope. Make something that takes 10 to cook, then pour a glass of milk before realizing you didn't pack, despite having been home all day. Well, bad fortune I was already away for and came back Monday morning to rancid milk in a pot filled with dried sludge. Thankfully, he had the common sense to turn the stove off at least, but still. The common area often had banana peels laying around and other trash as well, purely because he wouldn't bother to clean up, and instead would be midway through one task before deciding to go for a walk and forgot to finish the initial one. Story 80 would turn his computer on and start blasting the worst music you ever heard. He had to have it as loud as possible because he would then go to the garage and smoke all day. The garage was underneath us, so the smell would flood our apartment. Would just casually say slurs. Had a black friend who said it was okay, said he had ordered a shotgun, then said he was also diagnosed with DID and antisocial disorder. Don't know how much, if any, was true. I got out before then. The final thing he did before I got out was I had a friend stay with me for a bit. He found out where she was staying somehow, then drove to where she lived after she left, which was 3 hours away, and tried to break in screaming that she promised to duck him. Story 81. My first roommate in college. This was like my first time living away from my parents, and I personally am not that clean of a person. A bit shabby TBH, but this guy was my first roommate in college, and that was the last time I ever called myself shabby. He didn't wash his clothes for like 2 weeks straight, kept rotten bananas in the room for like a week, and all of his laundry was in a bucket inside the room. People that came to our room would always complain, and some would even refuse to sit. After a while, I started to clean things, but still nothing would happen because of how strong the smell was. One of my friends described it as if it was an elephant crap yard. Story 82. Me. I was the roommate from hell. No, but seriously, I had a roommate straight up punch me in the face because I told everyone any dishes in the sink I will wash and put in the dishwasher. I was never taught about cast iron skillets, so it was in the sink for like 2 days, and I thought I was being nice washing it for him. He physically assaulted me. Story 83. In my 3rd year, I was paired with a paranoid schizophrenic. He was one of those fine line between genius and madness types. We certainly had some really interesting conversations, but eventually he started stealing things from me, like my MP3 player, and leaving them in the common room of the dormitory that the girl he was stalking was staying at. The university tried making me and the other 2 guys we shared the apartment with change to a new dorm because they didn't want to be seen as discriminating against someone with a mental disorder. But once I pointed out that all they had to do was discriminate against him for stealing my crap, they eventually relocated him instead of forcing the rest of us to move. Story 84. We had one helicopter-parented girl in our student housing. She was completely unable to function without her mom. Even the smallest of decisions had her speed dialing for mama, who'd then dictate the decision for her. The mom would also drop in unannounced and try to inspect others' rooms too, deciding we all were bad company for her little angel, as we didn't instantly cave in. Naturally, the girl was completely unable to do anything on her own. What food to eat? Better call mom and ask what ingredients to buy. Disagreeing about something with the roommates? Better call the mom, who'd then ask to speak with the offender. It felt like the mom had a real-life Sims character. I can only imagine how lost the girl would have been had the mom died or otherwise gotten badly ill. Story 85. Had a roommate who ate pasta with can of tomato sauce daily, always had 3/4 of the sauce left over on the plate and in the sink. Of course, he never did dishes. Did the dishes for a while, but then got sick of it, so we all started throwing them out. He still kept doing it, and we stopped doing dishes. He ended up getting sick, most likely from the mold on the plates. His parents came over and started yelling at us about the dirty dishes. My one roommate got in their faces and told them it was their son. They shut up quickly. For the next year, I got a house with my other roommates, and he asked to join us. Nope, not happening. Story 86. This seems small compared to a lot of other people's horror stories. I had 8 a.m. classes, and my first dorm roommate would be up playing video games until 2 a.m. every night. More often than not, he would fall asleep while playing, but the TV would still be blaring. He also never picked up his messes. Had one of those, gallon cartons of goldfish and had them spill off his bed and just left it there. Also had a cold and let the trash overflow with his used tissues. Thankfully, moved out halfway through the semester because one of his friend's roommates dropped out. A couple weeks go by and the new roommate stops me in the hall and was like, "Did he never pick up after himself with you too?" Story 87. Had a roommate who insisted on masturbating when I was in the room. The first time it happened, I thought maybe she forgot I was in the room somehow when I was just a few feet from her. Next time it happened, I didn't turn around, but started purposefully banging crap around, hoping she'd stop. She definitely finished instead. Luckily, she was always under the covers, but she definitely got off on the fact that someone was there. I stayed out of my room as much as I possibly could that year. Story 88. It wasn't anything they did while conscious. We got on fine when they were awake, but they had a horrible snoring problem. We slept in the same tiny room of my college apartment, literally 2 feet apart maybe. And they would sleep through my headphones if I didn't have soundproof on. I didn't have a restful night's sleep for the entire academic year we roomed together. I started to hate seeing them come home. They were totally nice. And when they did other annoying stuff, like game until 1 a.m., they'd always stop if I asked them to. But the snoring never got better, and I can't believe I lasted as long as I did. Ducking hell. Story 89. He chewed tobacco and loved to drink Dr. Thunder, which was the Walmart version of Dr. Pepper. After finishing a can of Dr. Thunder, he would spit his tobacco chew in it and leave the cans all over our living space. One day, I was parched and got a Dr. Thunder from the fridge because we had nothing else to drink. I sat on the sofa and turned on the TV. I took a few sips of my Dr. Thunder and set it on the coffee table. Moments later, I began to reach for it and realized with horror that there were a total of 4 open Dr. Thunder cans on the table, and I wasn't sure which one was mine. Story 90. I had 2 female roommates, both 20. Both ended up dating guys who had kids, and the guys were 10 years older than my roommates at the time. They both moved in without asking me. One guy was kicked out because it turned out he was running coke out of the airport. The other one stayed, but I left eventually after he was screaming at me while completely naked and wanted to fight me because I asked him about a DVD while I was packing to move out. He was high on some homemade sunflower seed recipe he found on the internet that was supposed to mirror LSD. This was in Florida 18 years ago. Story 91. Never ever move in with someone that's downsizing. Jesus ducking Christ. They have pure emotional baggage and they will take that baggage and dump it on you. Duckman. That guy was cheating on his girlfriend, expecting me and my GF to keep his secret, and then bringing his GF all the time. It ended with I just decided one day to dump all his stuff out of the condo. Had to get police involved. Had to go to small claims court about it. The adjudicator let me settle with him to pay $400 for him to leave. Best $400 I've ever spent. After that, I stopped having roommates. Story 92. In a dorm that was a double that was forced into a triple. 3 18-year-old kids sharing a room with a bunk bed. One was chill and the other was a stereotypical frat party guy. Our dorm was dry, and we were underage. He'd invite his high school friends to pregame in our room before going out. Left one of his friends who puked all over my rug in our room when they took off. One time he woke my ass up at 3 a.m. to try and get me to leave the room so he could duck some chick. List goes on and on. Story 93. He was a right-wing political conspiracy theorist and fitness TikToker, spiritual guru, and unlicensed chiropractor. Very sexist, and generally willing to take advantage of people. He happily bragged to me once about having multiple long-distance girlfriends. One of them visited once, and they screwed non-stop for a week. Repeatedly woke everyone up in the middle of the night. His room was also *disgusting*. He used one of my bowls as a bedside tissue bin, let rice rot in another for a month, used a mattress protector as a curtain, didn't buy bed sheets for 2 months, and cleaned the place once a year. Story 94. My sophomore year roommate started a compost in an uncovered bucket in the kitchen. It wasn't really compost, though. It had no dirt, no mulch, nothing. She was just letting her food rot in the kitchen. She essentially drove all of us out of the apartment, and when we moved out, the vacuum broke, so the carpet wasn't as pristine as we had hoped. So then she texted us to chew us out for leaving the apartment dirty. 10 years later, and I still get phantom smells of the compost. Story 95. My freshman roommate kept putting her loft together wrong, so it would crash to the ground in the middle of the night. She ate the cookies tea my grandmother mailed to me. She asked me to leave the room so she could make out with a guy at 10:30 at night. She brought a drunk girl back to our dorm room after a party because she couldn't get in her own dorm room. She then proceeded to vomit all over our floor at 2:30 a.m. I was so relieved when she dropped out at the end of the semester and I got the whole room to myself. Story 96. Went to acting school. My father helped me move in. We get there and find a note saying my new roommate went to get some information from them. It was signed Grandpa. I casually mentioned that his grandfather must be helping him move in. He finally shows up. Weird grin, ear to ear, thin and gangly. Sock wrapped around his neck. I asked where his grandfather was. He tells me, no, everyone calls him Grandpa. He also is heavily into the bum lifestyle. Used to hang out with them a lot and wants to have a bunch of kids and push them around in shopping carts all day. Story 97. Not a roommate, but in undergrad, the girl next door was in Crew, the rebranded Campus Crusade for Christ, and would let them into the dooms to go door-to-door recruiting. She kept trying to convert her roommates. She was a big snitch for any rule violation, like she reported her own roommate for coming home drunk from a party. She would also call the RA on us for sinning, even if it wasn't against the actual dorm rules. Like it was a co-ed dorm, but she would go right to the RA about people visiting each other's rooms. Story 98. Stole and lost a hand-woven garment from a relative that was irreplaceable. Stole my phone and a saucepan too. Offered me a threesome with her and her girlfriend while I had a committed partner. She was secretly dating her GF while openly dating my male boss who just happened to harass me. Story 99. Second semester, junior year, transfer student from a college on Long Island. Dad was loaded and paid for his full ride. Kid sat in the room all day playing World of Warcraft. Literally all day. Didn't go to class, rarely went to the dining halls. I did get him to go exercise with me once, just to get out of the room. But he was always there. I hated it so much that I ended up paying an ass load for a single room my senior year. Story 100. I had a roommate slowly turn into a far-right conspiracist. He started being harmless enough. He firmly hated all politicians. Over 3 years on and off as a roommate, I eventually came home to him watching Alex Jones daily unapologetically and spewing him as gospel. He was actually pretty cool the first year, down for a good time. By the end, he was threatening my dog as a joke. He'd isolate for days at a time. Became so hateful, it was awful. I moved out ASAP. Story 101. Oh, she was awful. Constantly with a new guy. One time she didn't tell me or even lock the door and I walked in on them. Everything was always a competition and she always had it worse. She had meds and never took them. Living with her was hell and she was just so toxic. There was more, but for anonymity, I'll leave it at that. Story 102. Not that bad, but my roommate would never leave our tiny dorm room asides from going to class, but this sucked for me because sometimes I just really wanted to cry in peace or have alone time. But I could never be in the room without her also being in there, and she would also FaceTime people with no headphones. So I would just hear the entire conversations. I quickly started to only be in my room to sleep. Story 103, 2020, height of pandemic madness. Flatmate decided that her room was too lonely to quarantine when she had the Rona. She decided she was gonna us the communal kitchen, living room to quarantine and use the sofa as a bed. None of us were happy and all argued, but what we gonna do? Drag her out. She left pandemic tissues everywhere. Never wiped anything down. Sure enough, after her quarantine for 1 week in the kitchen, we all caught it. Story 104. She went off her bipolar meds, and after a week of increasingly erratic behavior, flipped out and started throwing things at us. But that was at least resolved quickly. The rest of us were adamant that we didn't feel safe with her. So after meeting with Rest Life and campus police, she left school and we changed the door code. I actually think it's worse when it's more like a friendship that's soured, but you still have to live together. Story 105 was in the dorm in mid-90s when the web was starting to actually have sites. My roommate would stay up all night surfing prawn on the web and news groups. He put tin foil on our windows so he could sleep all day. At the end of the semester, he had a 0.00 GPA and had bought new textbooks that were never removed from the plastic. Story 106. I never went to college. I have the big dumb. My brother did, though, and his first roommate was a hardcore weeboo. There isn't anything wrong with loving anime, but when you blare hentai loudly in the middle of the night and have your weeboo wife, he was legit married, living in y'all's shared closet to avoid the cost of housing, I'd say that would qualify as a roommate from hell. Story 107. Had a roommate who was a theater kid and loved starting drama with other people on the floor for no reason. I had to mediate so many arguments that I spent about 3 months of my first semester in college not living in the room anymore. When he asked me why, I replied honestly, "You enjoy drama and I ducking hate it." On the bright side, it made me much more social. Story 108, former college student here, but 1, kept trying to bring another individual over, and did once or twice, but said person clearly had no interest, and having to mediate that was uncomfortable. 2, after getting their own apartment a couple years later, they got married and divorced. They then broke into said ex's house to retrieve some items and stabbed said ex 20 plus times. Asterisk PT2 kept vague for obvious reasons. Story 109, my freshman roommate never bathed, never washed his bed sheets or his clothes, and frequently masturbated in his bottom bunk at night thinking I was asleep. He also listened to the full Broadway recording of Les Mis all the time on his stereo without headphones. So I just got used to never being in the room at all.